There are moments in life that shake the very foundation of everything we believe, moments that go beyond the natural and pull us into the supernatural. What if the line between life and death isn't an end but a beginning? What if in that sacred crossing, truths long hidden are unveiled with piercing clarity? This is not just a story of dying and coming back, but of a revelation so profound it will change how you view one of the most mysterious gifts ever spoken of, the gift of tongues. When I speak of the moment of death, I am not talking about something that can be explained away by science or reason. It was not a dream, not a hallucination, not a trick of the mind. It was the kind of moment that sears itself into the very core of your being, leaving behind an imprint that you can never erase. The moment my last breath left me, there was no fear, no panic, no desperate clinging to the life I thought I was losing. Instead, there was a stillness, a strange and indescribable peace that fell over me like a blanket. The weight of my body, all the tension, the heaviness, the aches, it all slipped away in an instant. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be free of flesh, to exist without the constant pull of gravity and the limitations of human weakness. As I hovered between what was and what was beyond, I became aware of a shift. The room around me seemed to fade, like paint being washed away by rain. The sound of the world grew distant, muffled, until it was gone entirely. Then came the silence, not an empty silence, but a full one, like the pause between the beating of a great heart. In that silence, I realized that death is not an ending. It is a doorway, a veil so thin, yet so absolute, separating what we think is final from what is eternal. I cannot describe it in ordinary language, because ordinary words crumble beneath the weight of the extraordinary. But I can say this: in that moment, I knew I had crossed into something greater. My awareness was sharper, clearer, more alive than it had ever been when I was breathing. Everything was vivid. I could feel without touching, hear without sound, see without eyes. And above all, there was light, not the harsh brightness of the sun, not the artificial glow of lamps, but a living light that seemed to breathe. It wasn't shining from a source, it was the source. It was everywhere, filling everything, and yet drawing me closer, as if calling my soul home. And yet in the midst of that wonder, there was an undeniable awareness. I had died. I had left behind the body that once held me, and I was now standing at the threshold of what so many fear. But instead of fear, there was welcome. Instead of darkness, there was radiance. Instead of emptiness, there was presence. I was not drifting into nothingness. I was being drawn into someone. And in that moment, all the questions I had ever carried about life, about death, about what waits for us on the other side, they all began to dissolve, because I was no longer searching for answers. I was standing in the presence of the answer himself. The moment I crossed that veil, I was embraced by something so overwhelming it could only be described as pure peace. It wasn't silence or stillness alone. It was a peace that had weight, that wrapped itself around me like a cloak, pressing gently into every part of who I was. It was the kind of peace no words can carry, the kind you cannot buy, the kind you cannot find anywhere on earth, no matter how hard you search. It was not the absence of trouble, it was the presence of perfection. I realized then that the soul had always been longing for this peace, even when I didn't recognize it in my life. Every restless thought, every anxious night, every unspoken ache of the heart, it was all pointing to this moment of being fully consumed by the presence of the divine. There was no fear of judgment, no shame, no memory of failures dragging me down. In that space, I understood that the presence beyond this life is not like human presence. It doesn't tolerate you, it completely knows you, yet fully embraces you. To be fully known and yet fully loved is an experience that human words cannot capture. I felt layers of my earthly self peeling away, the doubts, the pride, the pain, the regrets. None of it mattered anymore. What mattered was that I was standing in the center of something eternal, unchanging, and beyond comprehension. And the light, oh the light, it pulsed with life, almost as if it breathed in rhythm with me. Though I no longer needed breath, the closer I was drawn into it, the more I felt that I was not just in the presence of God's peace, but that the peace itself was Him. It was not a gift He gave, it was who He was. The weight of his presence was love, but the texture of that love was peace. It filled me in places I never knew were empty, healed wounds I didn't know I carried, and satisfied desires I didn't know existed. What struck me most was the complete absence of time. On earth, peace feels temporary, always interrupted by the next worry, the next struggle, the next demand. But here, peace was eternal, untouched by interruption. There was no waiting for something else, no wondering what came next. The present moment was the only reality, and it was perfect. I was finally in a place where my soul could rest without fear of it slipping away. As I stood there, I realized this was what humanity had been chasing from the beginning. Through power, through relationships, through possessions, through endless searching. Yet all of it pales compared to this one reality, that the presence of the divine is the only place where true peace lives. I wasn't simply experiencing peace. I was becoming one with it. And I knew then that once you encounter that presence, you are never the same again, whether you return to this world or remain beyond it. As I stood in that eternal presence, the layers of peace gave way to something deeper, a revelation that cut straight to the heart of what I thought I understood about faith. I was shown something not through words, but through knowing. It was not a lecture, not a teaching in the way we grasp things on earth, but an unveiling, like a curtain being pulled back to reveal what was always there. It was about the gifts of the Spirit, but more specifically about the one that humanity has argued over, misunderstood, and often dismissed: the gift of speaking in tongues. In life, I had heard debates, seen divisions, listened to explanations and counterarguments. Some called it foolishness, others called it divine, and many simply ignored it. But in that place beyond death, there was no room for confusion. I suddenly understood its purpose, its origin, and its power. It was not strange or chaotic. It was natural in the most supernatural way. It wasn't a gift given to elevate some above others, nor was it a tool of pride or performance. It was intimacy, the deepest connection between the soul and its creator, bypassing the fragile limits of human language. I realized then that our words are broken vessels, unable to fully carry the weight of eternal truth. Every language on earth is bound by rules, grammar, and structure, but the Spirit knows no such restrictions. When tongues flow, it is not the mind that speaks, but the soul. It is the Spirit finding its voice, speaking in a code that only heaven fully understands. And in that moment of revelation, I felt both humbled and astonished. How often do we dismiss the very gift that was designed to carry us into deeper communion? How often do we neglect the power placed within us because it does not fit neatly into human reasoning? I saw that tongues were not an optional ornament of faith, but a vital channel, a hidden lifeline that strengthens, heals, and protects. Darkness cannot intercept it, doubt cannot pollute it, and pride cannot distort it if the heart is surrendered. It was never about impressing others. It was about aligning with eternity itself. The shock to me was how much power had been left unused on earth simply because people either feared it or mocked it. And as this truth unfolded, I felt the ache of heaven for humanity, that they would recognize what they had been given, that they would stop debating and start receiving, that they would move beyond arguments and into experience. For in tongues, the Father hears not your mind but your heart, not your performance but your spirit. And that, I realized, was the deepest truth of all. It was always about relationship, never about ritual. It was always about intimacy, never about spectacle. It was always meant to draw us closer, never to push us apart. What came next was unlike anything I had ever imagined, a revelation so powerful it seemed to shake my very soul. I was shown that speaking in tongues was more than just a spiritual practice. It was a direct line to heaven, a secret language that bridged the gap between the eternal and the temporary. In that place, it became clear that every syllable spoken in the Spirit carried weight, that every sound was like a thread tying the soul closer to its creator. It was not random noise, not meaningless utterance, but a divine frequency, a vibration that aligned the human spirit with the very heartbeat of God. I saw it as a current of light flowing upward, like fire rising from the soul to touch the throne. It was not hindered by distance, not weakened by doubt, not silenced by fear. On earth, prayers sometimes feel as if they fall back to the ground unheard, but in tongues, none of it is wasted. Every word, every whisper, every breath travels directly into eternity, where it is received with understanding beyond human comprehension. It was astonishing to realize that this gift had been given not as a mystery to confuse, but as a lifeline to sustain. In that revelation, I understood why so many misunderstand it, because the natural mind cannot comprehend what belongs to the spirit. To the untrained ear, it may sound like broken speech, but to heaven it is a song of intimacy, a weapon of warfare, and a channel of divine communication. The more I grasped this truth, the more I realized that tongues were not just for moments of worship, but for moments of weakness. It was in the times when words failed, when emotions overwhelmed, when battles raged unseen, that this gift carried the believer directly into the presence of strength. I saw how tongues bypassed the fragile barrier of the mind, reaching into places reason could never touch. It was like the soul pouring itself out without filter, without fear, without limitation. And in that outpouring, heaven poured back. There was an exchange, spirit to spirit, heart to heart, that nothing else could replace. This was not a privilege for a few, but a gift offered to all who would yield. The tragedy was that so many never unlocked it, either out of fear, pride, or misunderstanding, and then the weight of the truth sank deeper. This was a weapon against darkness. Tongues were not just prayer, but fire. They were not just expression, but protection. Every utterance in that secret language struck against the forces of evil, dismantling chains, shattering lies, and pushing back shadows that words in our own strength could never defeat. It was shocking to realize that what the world often mocked as foolish was in fact one of the most powerful tools given to humanity. A hidden current of power flowing directly from the throne into the heart, waiting for the faithful to tap into it. As I was being shown these truths, something even deeper unfolded before me. The reality of tongues was not just about power, not just about access to heaven, but about the lies and misconceptions that had chained it for so long on earth. I began to see how this divine gift had been misunderstood, twisted, and even feared. For centuries, humanity has debated its purpose, some calling it nonsense, others elevating it as though it belonged only to the chosen few. But what I saw was far simpler and far more beautiful. The gift was never meant to divide. It was never meant to be a point of pride or a weapon of argument. It was meant to be a bridge. The misconception is that tongues are a performance, something to prove spirituality or demonstrate superiority. But the truth I was shown revealed the opposite. It is an act of surrender, not of show. It is the Spirit admitting that words are not enough, that the human tongue cannot hold the weight of eternity, and therefore yielding to a language that belongs to heaven. This was not about elevating self but emptying self, not about pride but about humility. When spoken, it was not for display but for connection. I was also made to understand how the enemy had used confusion to veil this gift from many. Because where confusion reigns, clarity is lost. And so, while believers argue over whether it is real, whether it has ceased, whether it is necessary, the truth is buried beneath the noise. And the tragedy is that many who long for a deeper relationship never step into the gift because of fear of looking foolish, fear of being judged, fear of being deceived. But what I was shown was that fear has no place in what is holy. Fear is the barrier that keeps the soul from unlocking the treasure already placed within. The purpose of tongues was made plain to me. It is for communion, for strengthening, for intimacy with God. It was given to bypass the frailty of our understanding and connect us directly with the divine. It was not to confuse, but to clarify, not to complicate, but to simplify, not to divide, but to unify. And as I grasped this, I felt the weight of heaven's longing that humanity would lay aside their pride, their debates, their fears, and simply receive what had already been given. The shock to me was realizing just how many live without it, not because it is unavailable, but because they do not understand. They dismiss it as unnecessary, when in truth it is the very gift that carries them into deeper strength. The misconception blinds them to the reality, and the reality is these tongues are not about religion, not about denomination, not about performance. They are about relationship. The true purpose was never about outward expression, it was about inward transformation. And when embraced, it changes everything. The final wave of revelation came with a weight that pressed into me more deeply than anything else. It was not a whisper, not a suggestion, but a calling, a command that stirred every part of my soul. The message was clear: awaken. Awaken to the reality of what has been entrusted to you. Awaken to the gift that has been neglected, silenced, mocked, and misunderstood. What I was shown about tongues was not just information to be admired. It was an invitation to transformation. The divine call was not simply to know about this gift, but to use it, to live it, to let it shape the very fabric of one's walk with God. In that moment, I understood that heaven does not reveal truth without purpose. Revelation is always tied to responsibility. And the responsibility was this: do not let fear, doubt, or pride keep you from stepping into the fullness of what has been given. The gift of tongues is not rare, not reserved for an elite few, not something to be locked away behind walls of debate. It is a gift poured out, waiting to be embraced by any soul willing to surrender. The shocking part was realizing how much strength, clarity, and protection believers walk without simply because they do not awaken to what is already theirs. I was shown that when tongues flow, they do more than align the heart with heaven. They awaken the believer to a deeper power. They awaken faith when fear tries to suffocate. They awaken courage when weakness tries to overwhelm. They awaken clarity when confusion clouds the mind. And above all, they awaken love, because in surrendering to this gift, you are surrendering to intimacy with the one who gave it. That intimacy fuels everything else: your prayers, your decisions, your strength, your endurance. The call was not just personal, it was collective. I could feel the longing of heaven for entire communities to awaken to this reality, for households to let the fire of tongues burn within their walls, for gatherings to echo with this heavenly language, not for show, but for power. I saw how different the world would look if believers stopped treating this gift as optional and instead embraced it as essential. The revelation was clear: the gift of tongues was not given as a decoration for faith, but as a weapon for battle, a key for unlocking mysteries, a lifeline for survival in a broken world. And then came the most shocking truth of all: this gift was never meant to remain dormant. Heaven aches for us to use it, not just in rare moments, but daily, constantly, faithfully. Because every time the tongue surrenders to the Spirit, the soul draws closer to God, the atmosphere shifts, and the unseen world trembles. The call was urgent: awaken, rise, and speak the language of heaven with boldness. For the gift is real, the power is present, and the time to use it is now. When all was revealed and the vision began to fade, I understood that what I had experienced was not given to me for my sake alone. Death had stripped away every illusion, every argument, every distraction, and laid bare the truth. The things we take lightly on earth are the very things heaven holds with fire and urgency. Speaking in tongues was no longer a question in my mind. It was a reality, a key, a weapon, a bridge. I had seen what it truly was: a language of the Spirit, a direct current between the soul and God, a lifeline designed to carry us through the battles of life with strength not our own. The peace I had felt, the presence I had stood in, the intimacy I had been shown, all of it pointed back to one call: do not neglect what has been entrusted to you. For too long, humanity has debated what was never meant to be debated. For too long, pride has turned a gift into a spectacle, and fear has silenced what was meant to roar. But heaven's truth was undeniable. Tongues were never meant for confusion, but for clarity, never meant for division, but for unity, never meant for performance, but for intimacy. The shock that shook me most was this: the gift was never far away. It was already here, already waiting, already offered. And the moment a heart surrenders, the moment faith chooses to believe, the moment the lips dare to open in trust, the fire begins to flow. It is not earned, it is received, not mastered, but yielded to. And once awakened, it changes everything. Prayer deepens, strength rises, darkness trembles, and the soul steps into a level of intimacy that words cannot contain. When I returned, I carried this truth with me like a burning flame. I could not unsee it, I could not unknow it, and I knew it was never meant to be hidden. The revelation was not mine to keep, but mine to share, that there is more, and it has always been available. The veil between heaven and earth is thinner than we realize, and through tongues, that veil is pierced daily. So the conclusion is not the end, it is the beginning of an awakening, the beginning of stepping into the fullness of what has been given, the beginning of refusing to live powerless when heaven has poured out power. And the voice that echoed within me still rings clear now: awaken, speak, surrender, and walk in the gift. For it is not just about a language, it is about stepping into the fire of intimacy with the one who waits on the other side of every word.